I've always considered myself a pretty reasonable guy, not the type to start drama or pick fights over petty things. I pay my dues, mow my lawn, wave at the neighbors, and mind my business. All I really want out of life is a little peace, a quiet place to come home to, and the freedom to enjoy it without someone breathing down my neck about fence colors or mailbox styles. My neighborhood? It's one of those perfectly manicured suburban enclaves just outside the city. Rows of modest but charming homes, each with their own little patch of yard and flower beds that bloom like clockwork in spring. We're packed in tight, lots barely, large enough to swing a hammock, but we make it work. What we lack in sprawling backyards we make up for in community, or at least we used to. Running behind our row of homes is a narrow path. Gravel-lined, shaded by old oaks and maples, it winds along the back fence lines and opens onto the main road through a discreet gate. It's not much, but to us, it's everything. A shortcut to the bus stop, a lifeline for dog walkers, morning joggers, and the kids biking to school. It cuts a full 10 minutes off the route to the grocery store. More than that, it's part of our routine, our rhythm. That path wasn't just a convenience, it was ours. Shared by a dozen houses, informally maintained for years. Someone would toss down mulch after a storm, others would clip the hedges back. No drama, no rules, just neighborly cooperation. Then came the HOA. Now don't get me wrong, the HOA wasn't always the villain. At first, they mostly stuck to landscaping reminders and seasonal newsletters about bake sales and caroling. A little annoying, sure, but nothing worth flipping tables over. I figured as long as I paid my dues and didn't paint my house neon green, they'd leave me alone. But power has a way of creeping in slowly, and then showing up all at once. It started with stricter parking rules, then noise complaints about kids playing basketball too late. One neighbor got fined for having the wrong shade of mulch. You could feel the tension building like pressure behind a dam. Still, most of us shrugged it off. Just another day in. HOA land, until they touched the path. That morning changed everything. I stepped out with my coffee, leash in hand, expecting to take my usual stroll with my golden retriever, Max. Instead, I found a shiny new chain and a thick padlock wrapped around the gate. A freshly posted sign glared back at me. Private access. Show members only. No warning, no vote, no explanation. I stood there in stunned silence, blinking at the gate I'd walked through every day for the past 7 years. My heart didn't race. I didn't shout or curse. I just turned around, walked back to my porch, and sat down. That was the moment they crossed the line. And the funny thing is, they never expected me to fight back. But I did, and oh, they were not ready. The next morning started like any other. Max was pacing at the door, tail wagging, ready for his daily walk. I grabbed my coffee, slipped on my sneakers, and we headed out the back toward the path. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows through the trees. Birds chirped. The air had that crisp early morning stillness that makes everything feel calm. Then I saw it. The gate, the old wooden one that had always been left unlocked, propped open with a rock half the time, was now bound shut with a thick silver chain and padlock. Hanging from the bars was a shiny metal sign that looked brand new, bolted on tight. Private access, HOA members only. I stopped dead in my tracks. Max whined beside me, confused. At first, I thought maybe it was some sort of prank, or a temporary thing, maintenance maybe. But the hardware was solid, the sign was official, this wasn't a one-day thing. This was permanent. Just then, old Mr. Green shuffled up with his cane, his Boston Terrier tugging eagerly at the leash. He looked at the gate, frowned, and tapped it with the end of his cane. "What in the hell is this?" he muttered. Before I could answer, a young mother came pushing a stroller from the far end of the path, her toddler squirming inside. She stopped, confused, then frustrated. Seriously? Locked? I use this to get to the daycare every day. Within the next 10 minutes, 2 Amazon drivers pulled up at the end of the street, looking for alternate ways to reach the cluster of houses beyond the path. One even tried hopping the fence, tripping over himself and nearly breaking a box labeled fragile. It was chaos. I pulled out my phone, started texting a few neighbors. Did you know about this gate thing? When was this decided? The answers came back fast and furious. Nope, what that? First I'm hearing of it. Typical HOA power move. No warning, no notice, no meeting. I called the HOA's number listed on our last newsletter. Straight to voicemail. I wasn't shocked, but I was furious. Not the red-faced, shouting kind of angry. No, this was colder, deeper. A slow, simmering sort of fury that creeps into your bones and makes you start connecting dots. This wasn't some innocent policy. Update. It was a power play. A silent, unilateral decision by a few smug board members who thought they could push the rest of us around. They didn't own that path. It wasn't theirs to take, but they wrapped it in chains like they ruled the place. And I knew right then and there I wasn't about to let them steal what was never theirs. They wanted to play games? Fine. They just picked the wrong guy to screw with. That Thursday, the HOA held its monthly meeting at the community clubhouse. Normally, maybe 5 people showed up, mostly board members sipping bad coffee and complaining about trash bins left out too long. But that night, it was standing room only. Word about the locked path had spread like wildfire. I showed up early, notes in hand, calm on the outside but boiling underneath. The room buzzed with murmurs. People were confused, annoyed, and looking for answers. I wasn't the only one ready to raise hell, just the one who came prepared. At precisely 6 p.m., Carol walked in like she was strolling onto a movie set. HOA president, queen of rules. She had that smug, overly pleasant smile plastered across her face, the kind that says, "I'm pretending to care, but I'm really just here to shut you down." She tapped the mic. "All right, everyone, let's settle in. I know there's been some excitement this week." Excitement? That's one word for it. I raised my hand and stood up before she could steer the conversation toward landscaping budgets. "I'd like to talk about the path. Why was it locked without notice or a vote?" She didn't miss a beat. "The board made a decision to limit access. It's for liability and safety reasons." "Liability?" I said, trying not to laugh. "That path has been open for over a decade. Nobody's ever had an issue. And it's not even HOA property. It's a shared easement, isn't it?" Carol tilted her head, as if she were explaining something to a child. "Well, if it's not HOA property, then maybe you should have maintained it. We've taken that burden off your hands." "You didn't take a burden," I shot back. "You took control. That path connects several homes to the main road. It's essential. You can't just put a lock on it because you feel like it." "We can and we did," she said, all sugary poison. "You should be grateful we're maintaining it now." There it was, that word again. Grateful. Like they were doing us a favor by stealing what never belonged to them in the first place. A few neighbors murmured in agreement. Mr. Green raised his hand to speak, but Carol shut it down with a clap of her clipboard. "Let's stay on topic," she said sharply. Unbelievable. They claimed it was about safety, about maintenance, about liability. But it was all smoke. There was no record of incidents on that path, no complaints, no warning signs. Just a few board members who saw an opportunity to flex and took it. That's when it hit me. They didn't own the path. They were bluffing, trying to act like they did, hoping no one would push back hard enough to prove otherwise. But I wasn't just anybody. I stood there for a moment, scanning their smug faces. I could have argued more, but what was the point? They weren't interested in reason. They'd already decided they were above the rules. Fine. Let them feel like they won. I walked out of that meeting with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My fists clenched in my jacket pockets, but my mind was already racing. They thought they'd locked me out. They had no idea I was about to buy the key. After that HOA meeting, I didn't sleep much. My brain was a storm of rage, ideas, and questions. Who actually owned the path? Could the HOA legally lock it up? Was there anything in writing that gave them the right? The next morning, I took the day off work, called it a mental health day. That wasn't a lie. I set up camp at my kitchen table with my laptop, a notepad, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. If they were going to make this about property rights and ownership, then fine. Let's talk ownership. Started digging into county records, parcel maps, land surveys, old zoning documents. The kind of dry, dusty digital archives no sane person willingly explores. But I wasn't looking for fun. I was looking for facts. And the more I looked, the clearer the picture became. The path wasn't listed under the HOA's jurisdiction. Not directly. Instead, I kept coming across an old reference. Easement 17B, limited public access use, shared utility corridor. The name sounded boring enough, but I dug deeper. Turns out, years ago, long before the HOA was even formed, the land behind our homes had been part of a private tract owned by a local family. When the subdivision was built, the developers negotiated shared easement rights for access and utilities. That path? It was officially designated for common use, accessible by adjacent homeowners for ingress and egress. It was never transferred to the HOA. They had no claim to it. None. But it got better. Way better. Somewhere around midnight, neck-deep in PDFs and satellite images, I found something incredible. A filing from just 6 months ago, buried in the county. Registrar's updates. The heir to the original land trust, the guy who technically still held the easement deed, had put it up for private sale. Not the land itself, but the usage rights. Turns out those can be bought and transferred independently. You just had to know what you were looking at, and apparently, no one did. Not the HOA, not Carol, not even the real estate vultures who usually snatch up this kind of thing before it hits public records. But I saw it, I understood it, and I had a gut feeling. This wasn't just a weapon, it was checkmate. The next morning, I called the number listed in the filing. A quiet man with a smoker's voice picked up, said he was tired of paying taxes on land he didn't even live near anymore. Wasn't asking much. Just wanted it off his plate. I didn't haggle. I'll take it, I told him. Name your price. The paperwork would take a few weeks to finalize, but it was already in motion. The easement was as good as mine, and the best part, nobody else knew. Not yet. Carol was still basking in her little victory, probably gloating to the other board members about how she'd shut me down. She had no idea that I now held the one thing she'd tried to seize, and the power to flip the script entirely. If they wanted to play ownership games, well, they just picked the wrong opponent. Once I confirmed the easement was up for private sale, I didn't waste a second. I wasn't about to let this slip through my fingers, not with the HOA gloating and patting themselves on the back, like they'd just solved world hunger by slapping a lock on a gravel path. But I also wasn't about to tip them off. So I kept things quiet. No loud moves, no Facebook rants. Just me, a plan, and a contact list. I reached out to my old college buddy, Matt, now a real estate attorney with a knack for closing deals under the radar. I sent him the county filings, the easement ID, and everything I'd dug up. Is this what I think it is? He asked after a quick skim. Yep, and I want it, he whistled. It's obscure as hell, but totally legit. You want me to reach out? I nodded. Discreetly. Matt contacted the heir listed on the filing, a guy named Charles living 2 states over in Arizona. He'd inherited the easement rights after his grandfather passed, but hadn't even set foot in the area in over a decade. To him, it was just a useless tax burden with weeds and headaches attached. I've been waiting for someone to take it off my hands, Charles told Matt during their call. Didn't think anyone would care about that strip of dirt. He named a price that was shockingly reasonable. I didn't even blink. I wired the funds that same day. While the paperwork made its way through the legal pipeline, I kept up appearances in the neighborhood. Carol, still strutting around like she was queen of the cul-de-sac, started boasting to everyone about the improvements the HOA was making to the path. They'd spread some new gravel, slapped a fresh coat of paint on the gate post, and even added a laminated sign with rules. She waved at me every time she passed, smug as ever. You see the new rules? She chirped one morning during her power walk. Much safer now, less riffraff. I smiled. Looks very official. Great job, Carol. Inside, I was dying. What she didn't know was that her kingdom had a new landlord, and she was about to get a very rude eviction notice. A few weeks later, the deal closed. Every I dotted, every T crossed. I officially owned Easement. 17B, down to the gravel and the air above it. First order of business? I filed a modification with the county for private ownership signage and boundary designation. Then I called a local contractor to install new posts and a gleaming professionally made sign at both entrances to the path. It read, Freedom Way, private access, trespassers will be prosecuted. Below that, in smaller print, use by non-authorized. Parties strictly prohibited. Owned and maintained by My Name LLC. You should have seen Carol's face the first time she saw it. I was sipping coffee on my porch when she marched up, lips pursed so tight they looked like a paper cut. What? Is this? She asked, jabbing a finger toward the path sign like it had insulted her personally. Oh, that? I said, playing dumb. That's Freedom Way, private property now. She blinked. Private? You can't just… Actually, I can, I said, pulling out a laminated copy of the ownership record. Bought it fair and square, filed with the county, all legal. But the HOA has no claim, I said, smiling. Never did. She stood there, floundering like a fish out of water, trying to figure out how this had all slipped through her fingers. It was beautiful. That gate? I replaced the HOA's padlock with my own. New code, new key. And I only gave copies to the original adjacent homeowners who'd been shut out, myself included. Let's just say Carol and her crew didn't make the list. They wanted to play ownership games? Well, welcome to my rules now. Let's see how they like being locked out. The first week after I claimed the easement, I let things simmer. Carol and her crew were in a tailspin, scrambling to figure out what the hell just happened. But I wasn't done, not even close. They wanted to play gatekeeper? Let me show them how it's really done. I hired a contractor and had the rusted gate removed. In its place, I installed a sleek, matte black aluminum gate with a digital keypad and RFID fob system. Weatherproof. Motion-triggered lighting. The works. Then I had a new sign posted at both ends. Clean laser-engraved aluminum on dark walnut wood. Backlit for night visibility. It read, Private easement. Access by permit only. Violators will be reported and prosecuted. This is not an HOA-maintained property. The moment it went up, you could practically hear Carol choking on her morning protein smoothie. Access was now controlled entirely through the fob system. I issued fobs only to residents whose properties legally abutted the easement, meaning the handful of us who had a true legal right to use it and had been using it for years. Everyone else, tough luck. When I handed old Mr. Green his fob, he looked like a kid on Christmas morning. I haven't felt this powerful since '72. He chuckled, pocketing the little black device like it was solid gold. The mom with the stroller nearly cried when she realized she could once again bypass the insane traffic loop the HOA insisted everyone use. Thank you, she said. Honestly, you've done more for us in 2 weeks than the HOA has in 10 years. Meanwhile, the HOA, board members, especially those who used to smugly strut down their path, were shut out completely. One morning, I watched from my porch as Carol marched right up to the new keypad, her expression full of righteous entitlement. She entered a code, probably the old one they'd used when they put up their lock, and the gate didn't budge. She tried again. Nothing. She jabbed the buttons, stared at the screen like it had personally offended her. Then she noticed the camera, mounted above it and turned to glare in my direction. Perfect timing. I walked over, calm as a monk, sipping from my world's okayest neighbor mug. She was fuming. I demand you remove this gate, she barked. This path is part of the community. No, I said, smiling. It's not. It's privately owned now. As in, mine. You can't block access to HOA members. Oh, but I can. And I did, she sputtered, hands on hips. This is a violation, an abuse of power. I reached into my folder and handed her a manila envelope. Actually, this is a formal trespassing warning. You are not authorized to access this property. Next time you try, I'll have to involve the sheriff. She opened it, her eyes scanning the document, jaw slowly dropping. I believe, I added. This is what you call policy enforcement. Her face turned the color of an undercooked steak. She stormed off without another word, nearly tripping, on her own fury. Since then, the path has become a sort of neighborhood legend. A VIP corridor. Quiet. Clean. HOA free. Kids ride their bikes down it again. Seniors stroll without stress. The rest of us nod and smile as we swipe our fobs and vanish. Behind the gate, meanwhile, Carol and her cronies, still locked out. Guess that's what happens when you try to strong-arm the wrong homeowner. I didn't have to wait long for the HOA's next move. About a week after the new gate went up, I received a letter in the mail. Official HOA stationery, stuffed with legalese and self-importance. Right on top, cease and desist. According to Carol and her team of clipboard commandos, I was interfering with HOA operations and restricting access to common infrastructure. Cute, I slid it across my desk to Matt, my lawyer buddy. He read it twice, chuckled, and said, I've seen HOA horror stories before, but this is like trying to sue someone for mowing their own lawn. He drafted a reply that was 3 parts professionalism, 1 part flamethrower. It began with, this claim has no legal standing, and ended with a concise, LOL. No. The cease and desist died a quiet death, but Carol wasn't done flailing. She called an emergency HOA meeting, sending out emails in bold red fonts and leaving passive-aggressive flyers on every doorstep. Critical discussion regarding community infrastructure rights, it read. Attendance strongly encouraged. Apparently, strongly encouraged wasn't strong enough. Half the neighborhood didn't even show, and of the half that did, more. Then a few were already on my side. I didn't even need to say anything. Neighbors spoke up. Why are we fighting over something we never even owned? Why did you lock us out in the first place? Honestly, I trust him more than the HOA. At this point, Carol was visibly unraveling. Her once perfect posture now sagged with stress. She kept gesturing wildly at blurry copies of zoning maps and half-baked bylaws, trying to spin the narrative that I had somehow robbed them. Finally, someone asked the obvious. Do we even own the path? Silence. Carol glanced around. Beads of sweat forming. It's complicated, but it's community space, always has been. That's when I calmly pulled out the deed copy and placed it on the table. This is a record of ownership, I said, tapping it. Filed with the county, it's mine. There's nothing complicated about it. She stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed her. You're being vindictive, she spat. This is petty. I just smiled. Funny. I said the same. Thing the day you put a padlock on my access. I leaned in slightly, not threatening, just clear. You started this war, Carol, and you just lost the battlefield you thought you owned. There was no dramatic shouting, no gavel-slammed finale, just the quiet shift of power. People saw the truth. And Carol? She left early that night, shoulders hunched, no clipboard in sight. The mighty HOA president, undone by her own arrogance, and a strip of gravel she never should have touched. In the weeks that followed, something amazing started to happen. Neighbors, people who used to keep their heads down at HOA meetings or avoid drama altogether, started showing up at my door. Not with complaints, with thanks. Mr. Green brought over a bottle of homemade cider and shook my hand like I'd just saved the town. I thought I'd be stuck looping around the whole block for the rest of my life, he said. That path, it's more than convenience. It's independence. One of the moms from the far end of the street brought me cookies and told me how Carol once berated her in public for letting her toddler pick dandelions on common property. She made me feel like a criminal, she said. You reminded us that this is our home, not a kingdom she gets to rule. Turns out, a lot of people had similar stories. Carol had been slowly tightening her grip on the neighborhood, one passive-aggressive rule at a time, fining people for mismatched mulch, threatening to tow cars that weren't aesthetically appropriate, even hassling an elderly couple for their non-regulation garden gnome. And now? The facade had cracked. 3 board members quietly resigned within 2 weeks. Whether it was guilt, shame, or just not wanting to be dragged down with the Carol ship, I didn't ask. I just watched the power structure start to tilt. And while I legally could have charged for path access, especially to non-easement homes, I didn't. I waived all access fees for the folks who had supported me from the start. Those who had stood up, spoken out, or even just offered a kind word during the mess. They got fobs, no questions asked. We didn't form an official group, but a sort of quiet alliance began to take shape. Someone jokingly called it the Anti-Karen Alliance. It stuck. We meet occasionally, grilling in someone's backyard, sharing stories, and keeping an eye on the HOA with just enough collective side-eye to make sure another Carol never rises again. Because in this neighborhood we've learned, respect goes a lot further than rules, and sometimes the best revenge is just giving the power back to the people who deserve it. I thought the drama might taper off after the cease and desist nonsense fizzled. But the real cherry on top came a few weeks later, when a local real estate blog picked up the story. Someone, still, don't know who, leaked the whole ordeal: the path, the lock, the easement purchase, the keypad gate, Carol's meltdown. The article was titled, HOA Power Grab Backfires Spectacularly. Local Man Turns the Tables. It was glorious. Screenshots of Carol's increasingly unhinged HOA emails were included. A side-by-side photo of the original rusted gate and my sleek new one, and a quote from an anonymous neighbor. He did what we were all too afraid to do. He stopped her. That was the spark. Pressure started mounting on Carol from all sides. Residents who'd been sitting on the fence suddenly found their voices. They wanted transparency, accountability. They wanted her gone. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled, this time not by Carol but by the remaining board members. I didn't plan to speak. I didn't need to. I showed up late, sat in the back, with a cup of coffee, and watched as the neighborhood turned on her. She stood at the front, clutching her notes like a lifeline, her voice tight and defensive. I only acted in the best interest of the community, she said, trying to spin it as a misunderstood effort for safety. Someone shouted, "Then why? Did you lock us out?" Another voice added, "You lied about owning the path." Every attempt she made to regain control just made things worse. Her tone got shrill, her hands shook. The calm, smug leader persona had completely cracked. One older resident stood up and calmly said, "You've embarrassed all of us. It's time." The board didn't even take a vote. Carol resigned, right there. But she wasn't done humiliating herself just yet. Later that afternoon, I caught her trying to use the path one last time, probably some misguided attempt to assert control or prove a point. She stood at the gate, punching in numbers, hoping the keypad would magically grant her redemption. It didn't. She looked up at the security camera, lips tight, fists clenched. I pressed the intercom button from my office, leaned in, and said calmly, "Sorry, Carol, VIPs only." There was a pause, then laughter. Not just mine. A few neighbors had seen the whole thing and were watching from their yards. One of them clapped. Another snapped a picture. Carol stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked away without a word. No clipboard, no speech, no power. Just a woman who flew too close to the sun and got burned by her own rules. And me, I got my path back, and a hell of a story. Months passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The path, once a source of frustration and division, had become a peaceful, green stretch of gravel again. The new HOA board? More reasonable. Less interested in power plays. More focused on maintaining what actually mattered. I took daily walks now, fob in hand, smiling to myself as the gate slid open with a soft hum. No more traffic loops. No more rerouted deliveries. Just the sound of birds, the crunch of gravel underfoot, and the occasional neighbor waving as they passed by, just like it was meant to be all along. The neighborhood felt more like a community again, less like a battleground. People were grateful, and I didn't need to say a word. My small act of resistance had turned into a quiet victory for the ones who had been silenced for too long. As I reflected on the whole mess, justice, pettiness, the satisfaction of standing my ground, I realized something. Carol had never understood that power isn't about locks or rules. It's about respect. They tried to lock me out, but I bought the key to the whole damn gate.